Welcome to the Steve Malzberg Show. Glad to be here. Tim Graham coming up in just a few minutes. Tim Graham, Media Research Center, Director of Media Analysis. And it's very interesting, before we get to Tim, if you were watching John Bachman and J.D. Hayworth, they were talking about disagreement they had or a difference of opinion they had, and they asked me to weigh in on it. Chris Christie spoke at CPAC today. Ted Cruz spoke at CPAC today. I think Ted Cruz, I didn't see the whole speech. I've seen Ted Cruz speak in person. He's a very, very riveting speaker. He has a sense of humor. He's personable. He walks around the stage. He doesn't stand behind the podium. And from what I saw of the message, certainly I'm a bigger Ted Cruz fan than I am a Chris Christie fan. But Chris Christie tried to save himself, and he got a standing ovation at the end of his speech, and I wish we had the sound to play for you. Chris Christie said, you know, before we could govern, we have to be elected. We have to get elected. And that's a good way for a middle-of-the-roader to try to save himself and try to appeal, hey, you're not going to be able to elect someone with the principles that you all have. You're not going to be able to elect someone with the beliefs and concerns that you all have. So come to me. You know, I'm a middle-of-the-roader. I try to please everyone. And I've disappointed lots of conservatives in New Jersey who supported me very vigorously, like Steve Malzberg, perhaps. So vote for me. I could get elected. Is he trying to say that he'll get elected and then he'll become a conservative? He ran as a conservative in New Jersey, and then he became a middle-of-the-road rhino, in my opinion. So, Chris Christie might talk a good game, and he might bamboozle some folks, and he might okey-doke some folks, in the words of Barack Obama. But he's not going to bamboozle me, and he's not going to okey-doke me. And on the broader issue, we're a conservative nation. And if we don't elect a true conservative who's not afraid to face the media, not afraid to take on the media, not afraid to answer back the media, and not afraid to say what he thinks and think what he says and go for it, we're going to lose to Hillary or Joe Biden or whomever. We've had McCain. We've had Bob Dole. We've been down that road. We've had Mitt Romney. Ain't going to work. Never works. Conservative, a true conservative. An unabashed conservative. All right, folks, I want you to watch this as we head into the Tim Graham interview. Hillary's accomplishments as Secretary of State?
In her tenure as Secretary of State, what would you point to as her biggest accomplishment? What do you think her greatest accomplishment as Secretary of State was?
Oh, my goodness.
Say it was Hillary's greatest accomplishment as Secretary of State.
I just think the way that she represented America.
Is there one moment of her tenure as Secretary of State that you point to and say, you know, that really impressed me?
I think there's probably 100 moments.
Okay.
I'm not trying to avoid the question.
No.
In particular, I honestly don't know to answer your question.
That's all right.
But I thoroughly believe that there's a reason that Obama put her there.
What would you say is her biggest accomplishment as Secretary of State?
Actually, it's maybe more of she didn't create a problem. Let's put it that way.
She didn't create a problem. Oh, my goodness. So welcome back, folks. Steve Malzberg. And as promised, Tim Graham, Director of Media Analysis for the Media Research Center, joins us. Hey, Tim.
Hello.
Hello. All right. So what this is your own Dan Joseph at the DNC winter meeting, and talking to delegates and people in attendance at the DNC winter meeting, and asking simply, you know, what were Hillary's greatest accomplishments as Secretary of State, and it's basically hamana Ed Norton.
I like the one where it's like, well, she didn't create a problem. Well, give her an A+ then.
All right, so I mean this, this speaks volumes in a way, doesn't it?
Well, it is one of these things where secretaries of state, what did they do? Was there some massive treaty that they signed? And sometimes, obviously, the treaties that the Americans sign don't get obeyed. You can think of the Clintons being hailed for dealing with North Korea. We signed a treaty which they violated with impunity. So sometimes these diplomatic quote-unquote achievements will be hailed by the news media, and then they won't really follow them up when they're just mercilessly violated. But she just doesn't have a headline moment. I think that's obvious. When her biggest supporters can't come up with one. You know, there's a new book out about Hillary now, and they try to make a big deal about the fact that she created an expo at the World's Fair to please the Chinese. You know, this was apparently a monumental achievement. And again, you have to say, what on earth does that accomplish strategically for the United States? You know, well, we want the Chinese to like us. Well, okay, but I mean, if that's your idea of an achievement, and again, primarily this World's Fair exhibit was funded by corporations. Oh, surprise! The same corporations who love Clinton's global initiative. You know, what you learn is Hillary Clinton had Obama's foreign policy, and she had the Bill Clinton foreign policy, and they went side by side. Yeah. But I mean, she had like this shadow private State Department that her husband was running, helping her out. You know, the entire thing looks like a massive project to make her more presidential for 2016.
Yeah, and of course, you know, there's going to be the downsides and the negatives. I mean, I don't see how she escapes this whole Russia fiasco. She could talk about Hitler all she wants. It's not going to change the fact that, you know, she was in charge of the reset, and it failed. And Benghazi, of course, is Benghazi, and the chaos and tumult all around the world. So it's going to be very interesting. But kudos to you guys over at Media Research Center and Dan Joseph. He did a great job. Now, you and our friend Brent Bozell have written a piece that is out today. Actually, it was out yesterday. I saw it at newsbusters.org, talking about how Obama flopped on Russia. And, of course, we had John Sununu on yesterday talking about the fact that he called the liberal media all kinds of names and said they had it wrong from the beginning, and they kept having it wrong. And, of course, Romney was right. They mocked him. And Obama was dead wrong on Russia.
And just like they were, you know, through the Reagan years, they were constantly making fun of Reagan. Reagan was basically suggesting, hey, let's put them on the ash heap of history. And that was comical. You know, the idea that you would somehow defeat the Soviets ran against everything the liberals ever believed. It was all about what they called peaceful coexistence, which would have been a pretty stinky system if you actually lived in a dictatorship in the Soviet Union or in Eastern Europe. If you were in Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, peaceful coexistence is not what people wanted. They risked being killed coming over the Berlin Wall, and so it's not surprising in a sense. What was interesting, I guess, is that again, our media that can't put two sentences together about a foreign country because they'd rather talk about Kim Kardashian. They just didn't pay attention to this part of the thing. Russia was not a hot spot during the campaign. But yes, Obama made fun of him, or you said Russia was their greatest geopolitical foe. The 80s want their foreign policy.
Right, yeah.
Now, how does that look now? Exactly. And they're not exactly playing that in heavy rotation right now. And Mitt Romney's way too decent to shove it in his face, which somebody should.
Yeah, should have shoved the whole Benghazi thing in Candy Crowley's face and his face at that time, too. We're talking to Tim Graham here on the Steve Malzberg Show. You wrote a great piece also, Tim, back a couple days ago about remembering Selma, Barack Obama, and Obama's weird Selma myth-making. And again, this was a 2007 speech from the scene of Selma, Alabama. And, you know, it invented his life story. There were fallacies. It was proven false. There were inaccuracies. But again, this guy just gets a pass. And you resurrected it 7 years later.
Yeah, and some of this is in our book Collusion that Brett and I wrote about 2012. But it just shows you, going back to the early days of Obama running for president, the way this guy has completely mangled his own life story. And you know what happens? Then most of the network reporters just get up and repeat. They get up and repeat. They don't question. They don't act like reporters. They act like repeaters. So he gets up and says something. I assume all these people who've been following me around in adoration. No, he was born in 1961, and he gets up in a speech and says, "Yeah, my parents met and fell in love in Selma in '65." I mean, what? How is that not just bizarre? You know, how much did the Choom gang smoke before this speech?
Yeah.
Kind of question. It was just unbelievable, and people just passed that stuff along. And when you read David Marinus, who's an editor at the Washington Post, wrote a book that came out in 2012 that just explains how Obama's mother and father were barely married when he was born. He was born about a month. She went back to Seattle. But that's not what Dreams from My Father says, you know, which is that they, you know, he was with his dad till he was 2. That's just not true at all.
No, and Tim, you know, I had Mark Obama on, who said some amazing things. I had him on from China last week, and you know, I asked him, and he didn't really have an answer. But I asked him, I said, you know, can you imagine a white candidate, especially a white Republican, who admits in a book that, you know, he smoked pot and did drugs and was wasted, and, you know, in high school and college or whatever, and being elected president of the United States? And he didn't want to get into that, but of course you know and I know what happened when there was this unsubstantiated, unattributed quote in a book that had yet to be published, that once George W. Bush did cocaine in, I don't know, college or whatever, and that was headlines. And here you got a guy who wrote a book saying, yeah, I was a druggie, and nobody blinked.
Yeah, they actually wrote a story in the Washington Post at that time in 2007. Remember, he wrote Dreams from My Father before he had a political career. It was sort of the way he kicked off his political career. But, you know, the Washington Post was very earnest about, well, his candor could get him in trouble. But, you know, it had the whole sound of, but we sure hope not.
Yeah.
Let's just move on. And there was no question with him where they said, how much cocaine did you snort? Who was your dealer?
Right.
Didn't it bother you?
Right.
There was no cocaine question. In fact, if you go back and look at '07, when Hillary's supporters would try to raise cocaine, they would treat them like racists. Jean Shaheen's husband in New Hampshire, I believe, had something to say about that. Robert Johnson, the head of BET, tried to raise his drug use. And when that would happen, the networks would all slap them around like, you're racists. I don't know how Robert Johnson of Black Entertainment Television's a racist. But, I mean, it was just, they just didn't want that to come up whatsoever. And you're absolutely right. That you're talking about a book called Fortunate Son, that 60 Minutes after the book was discredited did a big 20-minute segment on it anyway.
Yep.
I mean, it's just amazing.
It is, and we could only start to hold our breath and watch and wonder what they're going to not talk about with regard to Hillary. Hey, Tim, great to talk to you, sir. We'll speak to you again soon. Thank you very much, my friend.
Oh, you bet.
Tim Graham, ladies and gentlemen. Tim Graham, Director of Media Analysis for the Media Research Center, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. It is incredible. It is incredible. But remember, I want you to remember, there is no media bias, not once. 57 years, I haven't seen media bias, not once, ever, never. Larry King on this show. All right, folks, we're coming back with the panel. The Malzberg